Okay, and I can see that we're talking about doctrine, so everybody's here, right? And everybody's excited about talking about doctrine. So we're going to get after it here pretty quick. And this is not a one-way conversation. We have a panel up here. We're going to bring up some things, and I'm going to use some verbiage that General Pedradas used to use, which we are in a time point inside of Army Aviation where we should have seriously hard discussions in which we are going to scuff each other up over the next couple years about tactics, doctrine, and where we're going to go to fight LSCO and enemies beyond all the way out for the next 40 years. So bear with me, and here we go, okay? And so what I was asked by my team before we get started, this one's going to be about tactics. I'm Colonel Eric Puls. I'm currently the DOTD chief and will be until someone fires me, okay? I've got a great panel up here, and I'll let them introduce themselves. We'll start right with you.
CW5 Daniel York, 110th Aviation Chief of Stands.
CW4 Justin Sadegian with the 151st ARB.
CW4 Crawford, incoming Survivability Branch Chief.
Are we going to do the video first? So let's go ahead and roll the video. Now, there we go. Okay, so great HUA video, 100%. The thing I like the most about it, it wasn't just Army. It wasn't. And that was not Bagram, Afghanistan, or Iraq. That was out in California, right, guys? Okay? Obviously, a lot of Marine Corps in there, a lot of United States Air Force, and a lot of highly technical, a lot of cool stuff, a lot of integration at so many different levels, right? It's what we want to get after. Very, very special exercise. How much do you think that exercise costs? How much does it cost?
For us to go there is about $1.2 million for the unit, and the overall exercise is about $100 million.
So 2 or 3 CTC rotations just to do that. That's how complex and complicated it is for us to do the things that we want to do in the future. And we're going to talk about some of this stuff as opening. So one of the things that the guys wanted me to do, and you've seen some of the This Is the Way, and we talked about the Vulcans earlier, but the bottom line up front is, what does it look like for training, and what do we want to get after in the future of Army aviation? Where do we want to be? Okay, we have 2 problem sets. We have a future problem set in my mind, and we have a current problem set in my mind, okay? There's a couple things that we're looking at. Before this, and some of the themes for this whole thing was fundamentals. You've heard that for about 5 years now. In fact, General Francis had an article in Quad A magazine about getting back to the fundamentals. I think fundamentals are broken down by echelon. We have fundamentals for our new pilots. We have fundamentals for our oracle progressions. We have fundamentals for our staffs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So where do you want to start? I can tell you where we started over the past 4 or 5 years. We started in the human dimension. We started with AWS. We started with the junior warrant officers. Why is that? Largest cohort. What's the next thing that we did? We started going after the captains. CAC was directing that. And then what did we do? A bunch of the smart 06s and the former chief of the branch sat down and said, we need to start working on advanced tactics. And what do advanced tactics look like today? Because the structure that we have today is Flight School 21, okay? What will it look like tomorrow? What will it look like in the future? But here's some things that we've got to think about as we start to brainstorm this and move forward. And there's a lot of this that goes on in the halls of Fort Novacell. One, what are the fundamentals moving forward? Who is the man and or woman in the ring or in the box? And at what echelon, what do they need to know? And if you study anything about Theodore Roosevelt, you understand what I'm talking about. How do we incorporate the philosophy the boss has of see, strike, move, and extend? And the sole purpose of our existence on the planet is to do what? What is it? It should be a resounding support the ground force. Okay, so maybe we need to go to some ground force schools. Okay, think about that for a section. Where are we going to invest? Are we going to invest in the system first? Are we going to invest in the training first? Are we going to make sure the requirements are written so the training devices are there when the equipment comes off the assembly line? A little bit different than we did the past 40 years. Some of us who lived that long understood the first time we got a real Apache at Fort Eustis was when we banged one up. Okay? So are we looking at the requirements documents to do these things? You know, what is ATIC? What is UTE going to get us? Okay? What is our future ME course going to look like? What does AWS's first renditions look like? And then what is the PMI and the PMI and the POI of the future going to look like? How many of you know what the ADDI process is? Raise your hand. Okay? Right? Very few people in here. It is a very old and archaic system of which guys like me and the other DOTDs around the world are trying to change so that we can change more. Right now I'm restricted to 5 hours a course with 0 growth, okay? We have a 0 growth and I can't have any growth to change it on my own. So think about that for a minute. 5 whole hours of a PME is what I can change without having to go back to CAC and say, here it is. It's not a lot. We're asking for more because I believe if we got 10 hours, we could use the existing platforms that we have, we could use the existing structure that we have, change the content just a little bit. And we're doing a pretty good job at that, okay? What is the cost of our new programs? You said how much? $100 million? Okay? If I went to CAC with a $100 million bill, what do you think they would tell me to do? Okay, so how do we do this at size and scope so it's digestible, it's palmable, and we can get after it, okay? Everybody wants the newest hotness, okay? But we have to get to the point where we're building it in such a way that it's digestible, that the people who don't speak aviation, who make decisions, understand what we're trying to get after. That's where I look at the cab commanders and the senior cab warrant officers and say things like, hey, have you brought the ADCS out and actually did an AMS training flight with them? Okay? Have you brought the ADCS out to do an actual digital rehearsal at split base operations? Have you brought the ADCS out and let them see what it looks like to put an ASB in the field? Those are all things that we need their knowledge of, okay? And how much do we want to teach at the schoolhouse versus how much we want to teach at the units? It's a big topic of discussion. A lot of TSPs out there. We're putting too much on the unit. Is it just enough to go on the units? Things like that. So those are the kind of things. When I see the future and I close my eyes, there is a structure like you saw in there. Maybe we do design something like a tactics division. How does that fit in? Zero growth army. Who's going to man it? Where's the subject matter expertise coming from? All you guys out in the force are crying for people. All of us at Fort Rucker are crying for people. So how does that all work as we move forward? Lots to discuss. So let's go ahead and go to the questions, and I think they're on the TV in front of me. Go to the next slide. The first one I'm going to ask is what brought us here? And I'll let you, Mr. York, answer.
I'll take that one, sir. So many of you guys probably recognize this as good old Bagram Air Base. And so one of the big things that we talk about, is adapt or die. From the first time I got to this air base in 2003 with 117 cab to the last time I saw it with 4th cab here in 2021, Army Aviation went through a lot of adaptation for that fight. And while we adapted to get stronger and focused on that, we became stagnant in some other areas. And that's a lot of driving this process in transformation is our ability to adapt. When we went out to the Marine Weapons School, we had to adapt to an Indo-PACOM fight, which if you're at 25th or 16th cab, you're probably very familiar with. If you're not in those cabs, there's a lot of idiosyncrasies there that most of us are not used to doing. So I grew up as a young paratrooper. We had the concept of LGOPs, little groups of paratroopers, armed with commander's intent, ready to do violence of action in the middle of the night. In Doctrine, we call that disciplined initiative. So getting after that disciplined initiative and focusing it from the institutional level here at Fort Novacell of how we're going to create the proper trainers so that the force is enabled with that is why we're doing it. And we have been moving that way since, I see Colonel Waldrop up here, since we were working on decisive action training environment and incorporating that into our PME back in 2014 to now multi-domain operations with FM3-0 being the way we're going to fight and adapt. We've all heard what's old is new again, and that's a very true statement. But it's also an incomplete statement in that MDO is not Air-Land Battle 2.0. When we talk about the space and cyber domains, there's a lot we're talking about. We just had a working group prior to coming to Quad A about cyber survivability and what that looks like. How that looks like from an AMSO perspective, how that looks like from a materiel perspective, and space. You heard Casey talk about space enablers and our 3 Yankees and incorporating those type of things as we adapt for a future fight. So all of those things are bringing us to what you'll see next, some of the current efforts going on here at USAACE.
Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right, so right now, currently, I'm really not going to talk about the UTE. We've had discussions in other forums. UTE is a way for us to get to ATIC. What I really want to talk about is the ATIC overall and what it is. I've had a lot of questions over the last few days on what is a tactics instructor. I've heard, is it an SP? Is he getting, once he's done with the course, is he an SP? An ATIC is a Charlie. He is a platoon level instructor. He is your go-to guy for your platoon and company level training events, right? So and then the next question is, okay, so what's different between a legacy IP and an ATIC instructor? The biggest thing is the methodology of how we are training him. We are changing the environment in which we teach him. So right now, Apache guy shows up 12 weeks. We spend 12 weeks in the traffic pattern and some train flight area doing basic 1,000 and 2,000 series tasks. No multi-ship, no contingency operations, right? The scenario for an end of stage eval is, hey, you have an incomplete A part and I want you to figure out and identify what was not done to standard. I want you to get that completed, ask some questions, high-five the kid, and now you're complete, right? So no mission. Maybe a little bit of a scenario towards the end, but it's all still individual task, right? So what is an ATIC instructor? He's a tactics instructor that is teaching contingencies. Teaching contingencies in different environments. So terrain flight operations, but instead of just doing your basic 2000 series tasks, you're doing en-route mechanics. How am I moving as a flight? How is I moving as a fight? What are my objective area mechanics? How am I fighting the aircraft as a flight of two in a low, a medium, a high altitude, or a high threat, right? Those things. Still focusing on the individual instructor instructing or doing that active role reversal if you're a stands guy in the cockpit, but Gun 2 has its own mission. The Gun 2 is driving the scenario. So how do I drive a scenario of a flight of two, injecting certain things into the mission to achieve a specific learning objective? Because right now, when I showed up to a unit, I had 4 W4s in my company. I think we had 8 to 9 W4s within a battalion. You go to a company now, it's nothing but W2s and W1s, maybe a random W3 splattered within the battalion somewhere, and a W4. It's the Lord of the Flies, right? So with that being said, the experience is no longer in the organizations. So that institutional knowledge that a lot of us older generation learn from is gone. So where do we have a plethora of experience? Right now we have it at Fort Rucker. So how do we mitigate risk? It's been briefed all day today. We mitigate risk by training. Where's our experience? Fort Rucker. So we take some of the subject matter experts, some of the experienced individuals that are stationed there, our DACs, our GS, our DACs, our CW3s, our CW4s that have had multiple deployments, and we start to standardize basic things like link-up procedures, deploying to cover, actions on contact, and we're teaching them how to teach, we're teaching them how to evaluate, right? So that's one of the things. The other thing is rehearsal-based training, right? So right now, a lot of the companies, they'll go out there and they'll do battle drills, they'll do walkthroughs, maybe at a company, definitely at a battalion level, in a brigade, a rock drill. But rarely did I ever see a team or section go out there and do a rehearsal, right? That was something the Marine Corps did on a daily basis. If they went and flew a mission, if they did some sort of support, it was a team level battle drill that they walked through. Then from there, they stepped with learning objectives. They knew exactly what they were going to go after. And then when they came back, they did an objective area debriefing. So they dug into the debrief process and they figured out what they messed up and how they get better. To this day, you still walk away from an aircraft and you'll say, how was that flight? Oh man, that approach was good. Good weapons employment, and that was it. We're not getting better at fighting the aircraft, right? And that's what we need to focus on. So your tactics instructor is still going to learn how to teach. He's still going to learn how to instruct. He's still going to learn how to do the basic 1,000 and 2,000 and focus on that. But we're changing the environment. We're changing how he does it. We're changing how he teaches it and how he evaluates it and how he takes that information, debriefs it, and then takes it and enables it to adjust the training pattern for a company. So.
Hey, thanks. And you can also apply that to all the staffs too at Echelon. Everything that was just discussed applies to our staffs, our battalions, our brigades, and of course our division staffs. When you guys are doing your exercises out there, you're doing your complex gunneries, turning it into a complex training environment, of course, with the proper risk assessments applied, you will pay dividends on that. And so as we talk through some of these things, remember the 7 core competencies and the reason why we have them. And how do they change? Is the core competency for a deep attack or attack out of contact, attack in contact, the same whether you're in the defense or in the offense, right? What are we actually talking about? So I know that everybody has read this because the boss quotes it chapter and verse right now, new 3.0, right? Everybody's had a chance to digest this, okay? One of the worst things that we can do is hand this to a junior officer or junior warrant officer and say, go read this, come back tomorrow and tell me what you learned, okay? But one of the best things we can do is arm our junior leaders with this book right here, okay? And our senior leaders. If you go to page 57 in this, it lays out what our core competencies are and all the high points for what we want to do to include all of our doctrine that were currently written and unwritten. And now that this manual's out, this one right here, the entire army of wholeness has to go back and redo their doctrine, which is great for a doctrine geek like me, because that means everybody's burning up my phone asking, how do I apply Army aviation to my newest doctrine? Okay, we should be ready to answer that. We should be ready to help our ground guys figure that stuff out. And while we're doing that, we should be inculcating some of this new stuff that we're going to start developing and doing as we move into the future. Holistic, revolutionary redesign of how we do business, not iterative. Okay? All right, so let's go on to the next question.
Yeah, so I'll comment on this one. I kind of have, if you don't know me and we've never met before, I've been on the active side, I spent time on the soft side, and now I'm a full-time National Guard member. So I can say from kind of looking across the platform that if we don't get ourselves together and all do this jointly, we're probably not going to be as effective as we need to be holistically. So Compo 2 has a unique role. The continuity that the Army is suffering from right now, or the lack thereof, which is already discussed, is a thing. Like, for instance, and we'll talk about this a little later, the 101st 5th Battalion just came out. We did a 2-week large-scale denied area training event for them. And when you look across the formation, it's not just being an older guy looking at a younger force. You really see what they're talking about. And then as you hear about issues that we're having, you can see why. So basically what we've all identified is the fact that people now want to train tactically to senior level. And the force wants to do that and recognizes the need for that, but there's literally no one to do the detailed execution and instruction to build that core culture to get us there, okay? So we think that the only way we're gonna do this effectively is a partnership with the active duty side, much like when we went to MOTS. We brought National Guard folks and we brought our active duty brother in to say, hey, we have to do this together. And when you look at the iterative process that they talked about from your most junior warrant officer up through an ATIC, we still feel like that there's a solid place for a battalion level execution arm that really understands the threat, the aircraft's capabilities, and how to develop scenarios. So I'll tell you right now, if you had a person in each cab that understood this at a weapons officer level, using that level of professional standard as kind of your benchmark, you would have fundamentally different aviation training at each one of your organizations. I'll give an example. So at I think he's trying to tell me to speed up. So at McIntyre right now, which is a National Guard base, we can arm an Apache on the ramp, take off, legally fly 10 feet if we want to, for 330 miles to a 360 live fire range to execute a time on target live fire shot. All phone call capability, we can do that with people that are lawyers and doctors or whatever, that on a Tuesday, we have that training area of flexibility. That is not built in the course of a week or one tour or someone doing a job. That's built with people and an organization that has the cultural focus to see what they want, snap a chalk line back to it, and then develop the tactical training playground to really get after this. And this isn't a hit on Fort Rucker or some of the reservations, but if you look at what we're doing for training right now, it doesn't cut it. And if you look at the range, speed, payload problem that we're introducing in the future, unless we can do that, we're never gonna get to be better at it, right? So we think that Compo 2, through the facilities and through some of the continuity, can provide that mechanism to have a real graduate level course. And then we think that course can fundamentally affect everything downstream of that, just like every other weapons and tactics instructor course does.
Yeah, good conversation. Let's go to the next slide, please. Let's talk about bringing in the human and the materials.
So, over the course of this week, you've gotten to see some of the latest and greatest material solutions that are coming out. Some really amazing change for Army aviation that we have not seen in the 40 years that we've been a branch. When we look at this from the human in the loop side of it, we see risk. As I used to go out and train aviators before I became a Doctrine geek, as Colonel Puls said, I would talk to my pilots before we went out, and I would talk to them about three really risks that they were going to face that day. You know, the structural limitations of the aircraft, which are all drilled into our heads, the environmental limitations through our PPC, but I focused most of my time on the personal limitations of showing them what the aircraft in the environment was capable of doing and where their personal limit was. And what I've found is that a lot of our younger generation hasn't been driven the way we were. I can remember going out on my first backside of Kandahar true red illume flight and going, this wasn't like red illume back at Fort Bragg was, with all the ambient light that you had there. It was really, you couldn't see anything. And it taught us how to use our systems and adapt to that. So really focusing on that human in the loop. And as we look at the potential for divergence between our capability, and what I mean by that is if I have a pilot right now that can't fly a Black Hawk to its true limitations, to the edge of what that aircraft can do in the environment safely, then when I take that Black Hawk out and drop an FVL platform into that, I've just increased risk. I haven't truly increased capability. So that's why in our tactics transformation, we're really focused on making sure our training strategy at USAACE parallels what the material solution is going to bring. So we're equipping aviators through our PME, through our ATIC, our UTE, our AMSOC, and as we drive forward so that the force is going to have the right person at the right place that knows how to employ that aircraft. And that's the .mil PFP that you've seen on the other side. But again, just reinforcing that brilliance in the basics. This isn't anything too complicated, and you'll hear a lot of us say we're pulling old doctrinal manuals from the 80s and 90s of where we used to do this really well. Now, I can't just take an old 1980s manual, dust it off, and say that's good enough. Again, we have to do that good ADDIE process and the analysis to look at how we're going to fight in 2030 so we can validate that we're truly giving you a good product. But we're not recreating the wheel. We're bringing back some of those things that we may have lost or atrophied through the year. Brilliance in the basics, those fundamentals that then these graduate level complex things that we're trying to do have a good foundation. Because if I try to go out and just do AMS 28-2900 without those foundations, I'm building on bricks of sand that are going to crumble underneath us, and that's not what we want.
Yeah, the whole reason why DOTD exists, and it goes back to what we talked about when I first took over DOTD, which is what is our mission? What do we do for you, right? We design the foundation of which the house of USAACE has been built on. And so you have to help us continue that foundational building with fundamentals. You have to help us with that, right? We've got to find that sweet spot and balance of where are we going to teach at the schoolhouse versus what is the expectations when the soldier leaves and is ready to do things that you want to do. And we're holistically doing things. Across all of CAC, you're seeing COEs bring back complex field problems at the end of AIT. You're seeing multiple new iterations of officer training exercises. We're trying to link them together so that we can do them together. There's also some things about combining COEs, i.e. we go to the Maneuver Center of Excellence for maybe OBC or maybe the advanced course, up our partnership programs with our National Guard, right? How many of you have actually worked, raise your hand if you actually know what the partnership program is and have done two-way training events, i.e. some of my guys go to theirs or some of your guys go to NTC. This is all going to pay benefits as we move forward. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so a lot of times people will ask, they say, well, there's a classic like Army thing where it's like, well, what do I get out of that? So going to WTI and what a WTI does has to break that paradigm a little bit. And you know, if you're wondering what you get out of it, a lot of it's intangible, but it's directly applicable to making the force better. Okay, so for example, following WTI, we had the member of 5th Battalion 101 attend the academics with us. As we were having conversations and getting to know each other, and the value of tactical trainings being illuminated directly to them, they said, hey, if you guys have this big train area, we want to do a big denied area event, and we want to get ahead of this. How do we do it? So we worked out literally a 2-week classified level focused event that used every piece of infrastructure we have, full scenario development, where we executed, culminating in an entire battalion-sized air assault with 5101. We started small, and we mirrored everything that's been said with fundamentals. These are extremely junior aviators. They did not come in with a lot of background or capability to execute mission sets like this. I'll be brief and say that prior to coming to this event, I did the CTE and then got on the airplane the next morning. They were phenomenally more capable. They were phenomenally receptive. Everybody wants this data. And because you had senior people that were in planning cells that are formalized weapons and tactics professionals that are giving them those detailed execution answers to the questions that they need and teaching them, like hands-on teaching them, how you dissect a threat. What they went from was throwing down red rings on a map and saying, we can't do this, to, I'm not making this up, we had a W2 briefing crossing times for threat was saying, oh, the missile wouldn't be able to hit us there, we're going to pick our speed up and we're not going to do that. I mean, what's that now? Safety, yeah, but they didn't know what safety was before, and then like this light bulb comes on. And for me, I've been into this activity personally for a long time. I've always liked this stuff. I was alarmed at how quickly a junior force picked this up and how much more effective they were for their culminating training exercise, which was, by the way, a multi-100-mile two-target move with denied area considerations on top of multiple aircraft in the stack and everything. When you hear that, that should resound at how effective we can be right away with what we did. It talks about the partnership. It talks about the building block stuff that they're doing, because it's only going to be better if we build them up from the ground up. And then it also shows what having a really good set of facilities and logistics can accommodate for the force.
Outstanding conversation. Let's go to the next slide, please. And I think I kind of covered some of the vision earlier. I'm going to let you guys expound on what you guys think the vision of is the future.
So as we start developing the CMP and we start laying out what the course looks like, the biggest thing that we see it's going to end up happening is the development or the standardization of tactics. If we are going to teach tactics and we have to get it across all the MDSs, the byproduct of it is going to be the standardization of it, right? And that is going to create requirements to be able to get that out to the force. So an organization in the future that has that ability to test equipment, standardize how you flight against it, how do I incorporate it into the different levels of training and get that out to the force. There's been terms thrown around, hey, how do we create our own WTI? Air Force has theirs, Marine Corps has MOTS. What does the Army's look like? Well, we've taken a couple years ago, just a little backstory on when we started the WTI initiative. When we were with DES, a few of us went around. We went to Nellis, we went to MOTS, we ended up going to the Top Gun school, and we looked at all of these different schools and figured out which one best suited the Army model, and that was MOTS, because there's no way we're going to release somebody for 6 months to go to an Air Force WTI, but how do we cover it across a warrant officer's career? Well, the way we're looking at it is hitting it at different levels. BWS, Basic Warfighter, Advanced Warfighter Skills, ATIC, the Senior Tactics Instructor course, and then hopefully in the future an ability to go to a CTC and have an aviation-focused rotation where you can bring in these key senior leaders in there and have some sort of WTI held at an Army level. That was the idea of where we wanted to go with this, and creating some sort of air warfare patch or something along the lines that aviators would be able to wear and delineate them as that subject matter expert for the multi-domain. And that's where we're trying to get with this.
Yeah, and I'll just say, a lot of times discussion went to, is this going to be tied to a track, an ASI or something like that? Again, we're focused at battalion level combined arms, training, planning, and execution. And that's a lot more than just your warrant officers. That brings in your RLOs, that brings in your enlisted, that brings in everybody at that battalion level operating under that division as the unit of action that employs that combined arms techniques and all that. So that's where we're looking at, if we can get to that level where you bring in those majors, those field grade NCOs, warrant officers, train them to do combined arms planning, training, and execution, and then those are going to be your future brigade commanders, command sergeant majors, senior warrant officers. Yeah,
the target needs to be the mission. The ancillary steps of what's laid out to do a task, it can't be the way we think about things, and that has to be holistic. So if you don't start with success, like here's the problem, how do we successfully do this with what we have, and then work backwards from there, I would ask if maybe the process is fundamentally wrong.
So we'll open up for some questions from you guys out in the audience. Anybody got any questions? Raise your hand. I'll hand you the mic. Anybody? Okay. I'm not running over there, so.
Thank you, sir. First, to answer your first question, job of Army Aviation is to leverage aviation skill to reduce risk for the ground force. At least that's the way that we talk about in the 160th. My question for the group is, why did we touch standards? Why didn't we touch the AMSO course and rework the AMSO course and leave standards the way that it is? And the reason why I ask that is that in my organization, we pride ourselves on doing the basics correctly all the time. So as we speak about fundamentals, sir, we deliver on the basics. That's how we teach organization. And then to kind of go with what you're talking about, the mission is complex. And our job as tacticians is to take something that's complex, multivariable, all these things that we can't control, turn to something complicated, solvable by math, and then broken down into simple tasks or ATM tasks, right? So as a tactician, your job is to do that digestion to get it to an ATM task, and standards delivers the ATM task. So what I'm asking is, why did we not go towards standards, tactics, safety, and maintenance, as opposed to sort of degrade the AMS field and add more on the standardization plate? That's my question.
So I'll start. I'm sure they've got some comments. So I will say we haven't left AMS out of this. We're taking a holistic approach. Step one to that was the AMSO course, which used to exist within 1st Aviation Brigade and was treated as kind of the redheaded stepchild to the other PME courses like the Captain's Career Course. We had that moved out of 1AB into 110th into a holistic tactics organization. As we try to merge, and not merge in the fact that they're going to become one, but the relationship between the AMSO and this tactics instructor, they need each other. And just because they do similar things does not mean they're the same person. Where there's separation is in roles and responsibilities. So equipping our AMSOs with the advanced mission planning capabilities and tasks that they do, giving them the ability to evaluate, as Mr. Peterson spoke earlier, of integrating UTE into the AMSO course. We're equipping that AMSO to be on that forefront. But again, we know we just can't burden the AMSO to do everything. Those were some of the issues we had early on in the TAC Ops track was, well, it's not standards, it's not safety, it must be TAC Ops. And we took on everything under the sun. And what ended up happening was you had individual pillars. TAC Ops officers that were really good at PR, but nothing else. What we're building now is a holistic survivability officer that knows how to work well with tactics instructors. They can fill in, especially in a LISCO environment, if one gets shot down, you have capability that cross levels and vice versa.
We're not getting rid of standards. We're just trying to give the IPs the tools to be successful in a unit. That's it. Because right now, you go to a unit and you're, as a task force SP or a battalion SP, I would get a guy back from IPC and he would have 52 hours of pilot and command time. But that company commander would rely on him because, by the way, he may be the only one IP in the company or two IPs in the company, and he's not the senior guy, but that company commander is going to rely on him to help train his force. But where in his training have we given him the tools to be successful to operate and go fight the aircraft? Nowhere. We were allowing it, maybe sometime as a pilot in command, but the majority of the guys that we're getting within IPC are 51, 52 hours. They're very, very low time guys. And those hours may not be quality. It may just be quantity because that unit needs instructor pilots. Talking to some of the CCWOs out there, for 25th, they've received 0 IPs on the inbound. All the IPs they have within their organization are homegrown. All of them. And that being said, if they're homegrown, we have them for 12 weeks. Why aren't we giving them the tools to be successful to help that company commander out to be successful? Because you're relying on your MTPs, who may have a lot more time than your pilot, your IPs, maybe your AMSO, right? And everybody is tasked out doing different missions. So the IP is the one out there training. He's the one doing the missions. And then that's why they're the ones right now involved in all these accidents, because they're doing too much with not having the skills to be successful.
Yeah, and I'll be real honest with the answer on the why we wouldn't do the each side, right? So in your organization, you got continuity and you have a fundamental culture already that's targeted at a mission set. And you're hearing, and I'm telling you, when I was there, I would have thought similar things. You go out in the force right now and you see there is an absolute absence of continuity on a tactical fundamental level. So if the team of people here tried to change the eaches on the way up, never would have happened. So we have to jump the line because we're trying to get a fundamental change in how we do things. So to get a fundamental large-scale change, you're not going to do that from the bottom up. And I'll go one step further. If anybody thinks an ATM is teaching you how to fight a war in large-scale combat, you're wrong. So every other service doesn't use their ATM and saying that plus or minus 5 degrees is going to get you across the battlefield. It's not. They use tactics manuals. So what our goal is to actually develop something like, or join in with something like an AFTTP, where we talk classified at the appropriate level to get guys what they need, and let standards do what they're doing right now and ensuring that they already have a mission where they're making aviators capable of doing these tasks. But those are two separate things in my opinion.
Any other questions?
Hey guys, CP4 Brian Dool, Chief Regiment Standardization Pilot for the 160th. First of all, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming here to socialize these concepts. We're extremely appreciative of it. What I would like to know is if we were to add UTE and ATIC, subtracting tactics, what are we doing with ATIC just for standardization and instructor identifier requirements, right? So you said Charlie identifier is an ATIC graduate?
Yes.
So when we talk Charlie versus India and TAC Ops, we're just trying to look for outputs and requirements for AMSOs versus ATIC graduates so that we can assist in this process also.
All right, so based off of what I know about that, the UTE identifier is going to be the 6. It's going to be quantified with 6 on the for the tracking, and that's what I understand right now. The ATIC will be a Charlie, and you're still going to have for Apaches, the 2 Charlies in an Apache company, and then your SIP. So that's not going to change. Other than that, I don't kind of understand where you're going with the question. Go ahead. Am I missing it?
Yeah, during the ATIC instruction portion of things, whenever a UTE comes back to Fort Novosel, that sounds really weird, by the way.
Yeah.
To receive instruction for the certification process of becoming an IP, right?
Okay.
What, if we were to remove tactics throughout the equation, do they receive during the ATIC portion of that will equal a Charlie identifier?
So in the course, they're still getting the fundamentals of instruction. They're still getting during the phase. So we have it broken down into stages, right? And our stage 3 in the CMP across all airframes, you're going to go from single ship instruction to multi-ship instruction, right? So you're still instructing and you're still teaching the basic 1000 series and 2000 series tasks. So at the end of the day, you're not really losing the ability. You're still an instructor, but we're just changing the environment in which we instruct the individuals and giving them the tools to go out there and instruct in a different environment. So the chart, that's the biggest thing is we are teaching tactics, but it's in a way that applies to the specific missions for the airframes.
Okay, thank you. And then just to draw the differences between an ATIC grad then and an India identifier as we know it right now, being a TAC Ops guy, right? That's kind of what we're trying to quantify over here to align with the efforts that you guys are doing to move forward.
We get a lot of those questions. Hey, I've got an ATIC grad and an AMSO who's a UTE. Corporate wants to see the difference in these two pictures. They're the same picture. Understand that. That is why next month we go into our critical task site selection board. So the instructor pilot course is built off the 6 5000 series tasks in the ATM. Those will not be applicable to ATIC the way it has been in the past as we build UTEs that then go to ATIC, who are already evaluating and instructing in those fundamental areas, now growing into the more complex mission areas. So this CTSSB is going to very clearly outline what the tasks of an AMSO is, different from what an ATIC is, and it's why we're bringing all the instructors and AMSOs to Novacell to do this together, to do this work. Because I can't really tell you what an AMSO should be if I'm not balancing that off of what we're building. So understand that may have been messaged unclearly up to now, and it's because we haven't done that CTSSB. Coming out of that CTSSB, there will be very specific, clear, defined tasks and roles that we will then push out to the field to say, this is what an AMSO does, this is what an ATIC does. There may be those tasks that cross-level, that we say, hey, both of them need to be able to do this one thing. But there are going to be clearly defined differences in why you have two separate tracks.
Somebody else can go if you want. No, keep asking questions. So, with that, could we contrast the differences between a UTE then and a Charlie identifier? What's the UTE limited? Let's say he does all the things, right? Be a blackboard in that unit. What are the differences in the best case, right? That's fine. It doesn't matter. What are the differences between that individual? We'll say Brian Dole's a W-2, right? With 130 hours versus an ATIC graduate in manipulation of flight controls, tasks, and other things, or am I completely open to do all the things because I've had a super squared away SP that has mentored me at my unit?
So I'll say you're going to see differences in units because some, much if we go to a Compo 2 unit where you have a lot of people who have been there for a long time, or the regiment where you've got that continuity and that mentorship, you're going to have a far more capable UTE based on how you run that in-house. But at a base level across the force, let's say I just take a random W-2 who is not tracked and make them an AMS UTE. They're going to understand the tactics, they're going to understand the standards of the maneuver, but not to the level that an AMSO can apply that to the larger environment. So while they can go out and evaluate kind of the meat servo side of it and say, yeah, you are within task condition standards to perform the task and maneuver, the AMSO is the one that's really going to come in and go, okay, well, you did that, you avoided that radar threat, but it drove you into this other threat area. And they're opening that aperture of the mind up to say, how do I apply it to real life, not to just the task and how I do it to standard? Does that answer your question?
No, it absolutely does. And the way that I have experienced that in the past, not necessarily even in the regiment, is a unit trainer, like not a UT in the scope of being task-specific UT, but someone that is at the battalion level that's doing situational training exercises for a company or for several individuals to do those things. So I think what I'm getting is you're enabling that individual to understand ways to coordinate assets and effects to then allow them to get into this fight in the future, and then socializing those concepts so that he can plan those things for the units.
Yeah.
I guess my difference, though, and still to answer the question, between a UTE and a Charlie identifier, are there any limitations between the two as far as basic like maneuvers, tasks?
Yeah.
Can UTE do everything?
So they're the stands guys, and I'm not saying I'm anti-stands, but that's their thing to run. Fundamentally, if you think about it like this, while this all shakes out, every other service does what this model is, right? So we don't need a high-level 12-week flying course graduate to teach people how to fly traffic patterns. You know what I'm saying? So if you get...
I totally disagree with that, because all the other components we work with at all times are envious of Army aviation.
Okay,
We master the basics.
I will... Yeah, but I will counter disagree with that, because I'll say that two 16-year-olds get in a Cessna and fly it around in a traffic pattern, and we have to get past that. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say if you have a limited resource, which is an IP, a senior tactical pilot, and they spend all their time, literally all their time, flying around traffic pattern doing RL progressions, who then, that mid-grade officer that has to develop tactical scenarios, who then does that? And so it's a waste of a resource, I think, in our opinion. So we're trying to get it down to what we think is an appropriate level so that we can free them up to do things tactically. And that's the whole goal with all this. And I will say that literally every other service, we didn't just come up with this, they follow that model. So when you're a new Marine aviator, a new Air Force aviator, you become an instructor, and you instruct a limited task based on your individual proficiency that you get signed off to do. Then you go to a course that gives you the gift of tactical flying experience that then enables you to be a weapons and tactics instructor. We're following that model fundamentally.
The UT, the biggest thing with the UTE is the fact that it's going to free up the IPs from focusing on what's important. Because right now, you look at a IP and he is stuck with nothing but RO progressions and A parts. That's all he is doing right now. And he's not able to get outside of the traffic pattern and focus on what's important, and the fact that because he is so slammed with progression. You know, Fort Rucker's producing more W1s and lieutenants than ever before. So, and we're throwing these at the units, which is now putting more of a requirement on the IPs. There's a huge shortage. IPC is backlogged. So the UTE gives that unit the flexibility to create units or instructors within their organizations to go base and do basic tasks to allow that IP to focus mainly on maybe 2,000 series tasks, 3,000 series tasks, team flight, team employment. Because right now they are so slammed, and you see that with all the accidents going on. They're just trying to keep afloat. They're trying to do the right thing, but we're killing these guys out there because they just.
Not at all opposed to UTE.
Yeah.
I just don't know the difference between Charlie identifier and the UTE.
Now, let me see if I can rustle that for you. So I'm Colonel Mike Johnson. I'm the 110th Aviation Brigade Commander down at Fort Rucker. Dan's my chief of stands. All right, so they're exactly right? A UTE is going to, the big idea here, and there's a couple of different pieces here, but the first big idea is to unburden those traffic pattern tasks from our IPs. So you have a day UTE, out in the unit. That day UTE can now go out and do RL progression and evaluations in the day, in the traffic pattern, and get that stuff done. So you're not consuming an IP doing that. As we go into the future and as we continue to change the instructor pilot course and that Charlie identifier, it becomes critical. We're going to slowly start stepping up the UTE input requirements into the aviation tactics instructor course at Fort Rucker. So starting this October, you're going to have to do the distance learning module for UTE. That's going to have to be complete before you come to Fort Rucker. At some point in the future, we'll step that up. You'll have to have the day module done. You'll have to have the night module done. And if you're a 64, you'll have to have the gunnery module done. And so the other effect that UTE is going to do is it's going to increase the quality input into the ATIC course. And what that lets us do is, I think this is what gets after your question, that lets us shape and really get after training that tactics instructor. One of the things I'm really excited about as we look in for the full implementation of the ATIC course, we're probably talking 25 or beyond, is that the last 2 weeks of the course, they're going to be we've already started construction on it, but a bay with what's replacing the AVCAT, the RVCTA. We'll have a number of those set up there. We're going to align all of the 3 advanced aircraft courses with the AMSO course. They're all going to be in together for 2 weeks. Executing AAR missions. Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. So when they show up to that Combat Aviation Brigade, which, oh, by the way, has the RVCTA as well, you're going to have a CW2 that knows how to structure, how to train, how to AAR those types of collective training events and help that company commander and those battalion commanders get after tactics.
Okay, sir. Thank you. I guess I was just familiar with the STACOM back when that limited UTEs from manipulation of power control levers and other things. And I was just contrasting, is that going to be something that now you're at Fort Rucker with your Charlie identifier so that you can do more specific things with the helicopter to include all of this? And I'm not a naysayer on anything tactics or as we get into training joint level and combined things, I think it's amazing. We want to focus on that. But are there any limitations now, or how do you guys see that in the future?
Hey, Ryan, one thing I'd bring up, just to be honest with you, to get into the details that you're probably looking for is probably like a sidebar conversation. I'm not trying to shut it down, but like there's a lot that's into it, and like I think we could. But if we went through the whole POI right now, it'd bog it down.
So hold on a second, guys. So this is exactly what I was talking about earlier, right? So this is awesome. This is what we're supposed to be doing. I want you to scuff us up on all these things, because when you do, we learn from it. We learn from the regiment all the time, and your comment is right. They do look at us for fundamentals, all right? So we're going to kind of move on to the next subject, right? Julie took notes on this, right? We're going to have, I think we have time for one or two more questions, okay? But we need to scuff each other up like General Bradradas used to say all the time. If we're not, then we're not making sure we're guarding the resources and doing the right things. We have to do what just transpired here. We have to understand all this stuff. And if we miss something, it's going to be paid for and life treasure for someone else's family. So continue to scuff each other up, not the verbal or physical kind, but you get what I'm saying. Hua?
I just had a comment. You talked about the unit cost for first 151st, as well as the total cost for MOTS 1. I just recommend, that's a kind of a sunk cost, right? So that's a resource of allocations. The Marine Corps, they have 2 planning conferences, resourcing MOTS 1, over the course of the year. So I would just caution, because you do those price tags up front, scare people off, as opposed to it's really resource allocation, just kind of getting after those higher level training events you want to get after you. So just a comment I had for you.
Appreciate that, Scott. We have 2 in the back there.
Okay, we're going to do this guy, then we're going to do you, okay?
My understanding of the UTE program and what we've done, by the way, CB4 Nick Keppen, Cab SP at 101, is that if I have a full-up UTE, there is no difference right now between a Charlie, like bar none. I don't even think I have to complete the entire AMS module because I can get all the tasks done in the day-night MVG module. And I can have a full-up evaluator without sending them anywhere. That's the way we understand it. That's what we've been working towards. My question specifically is if we are using the UTEs to push our senior guys to be trained in more tactical type scenarios and pushing the boundaries for those higher echelon tasks, how does the generation of AMS specific UTEs, further that end? Because what we're seeing is every time I make an AMS UTE, my eyepiece, the senior guys in the company, the most experienced guys, are spending even more time in the traffic better.
Yeah, no, Nick, thanks for that question. So that's a lot of the reason why DES is assisting us in validating UTE into the AMSO course right now. Years ago we added fundamentals of instruction, methods of instruction, and 10.5 hours of simulator time. And you weren't really getting anything out of it other than a well-trained person. But that was somewhat of the model that was used to create the AMS UTE. So we're just having that organization come back and validate that in the course so that the person you're getting at the end of the day has a capability. We're not telling you, hey, we need you to spend extra time and resources to create something, when the model is evolving to the focus on the 1000 series day and night UTEs to enable these things. So really we've got a solution for ATIC and AMSOC. The bridging strategy is the toughest part, getting us to that portion. And there is absolutely an upfront cost with these units. But we've seen great methods from 10th Mountain, 1st Armored Division and their UTE academies trying to help shape that and get those guys pushed through. And we think at the end of the day, having an AMSO that is leading from the front in the cockpit as an AMS UTE is the way to go, not backwards to the geek in the corner that's, going, let me get the computer, and my commander was like, hey, printer fixer guy, come over here. And I would turn it off and on in magic. But, the AMS UTE, again, us taking that burden on at Novacell is trying to take some of that off of you in the force. Does that answer what you were trying? We could sidebar some more.
I'm Colonel Shane Finnison, Director of Aviation at ForceCom. Absolute violent agreement with what we need to, with the gap. We'll just call it what the capability gap is and what we're trying to fix. Going back to resources, the thing that I would recommend that we do is keep in mind the ultimate resource is time. And I think that whatever we come out with regard to ASIs and identifiers and whatever it looks like. I think we just got to keep in mind that it needs to be usable down at the company level, of course. That's really what we're getting at. And so when those graduates come back, they need to be hungry to join the company training meeting and to be able to say, here's what we need to do, here's our next couple weeks on the flight schedule, here's how we're going to do this week in and week out. It can't be this huge, obviously it needs to be scalable, but it can't just be this huge big event that happens once or twice a year and that we've got to lay out in QTB and we've got to fight like hell in order to defend the time. It needs to be something, if you just got your regular routine garrison battle rhythm week, if you're going to fly Monday through Thursday, it needs to be something that could happen on a Tuesday and again on a Thursday night with different crews. It needs to be something that is able to go out there and do a couple times a week at scale. But I know that what I just see over and over and over again is in the companies and the battalions, they have to just fight so hard to train, and it can't be such a big, huge thing that it's not actually happening, because our real gap is when you go down there, you start pulling the thread on the flight schedule, and you go, oh, we're doing team training, we're doing platoon training, what are we doing? And then you find out that that's where the rigor is lacking. And so we just need to be able to equip them to be hungry, and then we've got to, of course, down through the chains of commands, we've got to inject this into routine weekly training management, company level training meetings that are driving the flight schedule that is happening multiple times a week.
That's such a great point, and that is sort of to the point, right? So when you have a WTI, they're seen as the company's professional for tactics, and so that's what we're trying to mirror and build, where you don't just get someone that comes back and knows how to use IMOM. It's to your point exactly, where they're like, hey, you're going to be expected at your appropriate level to holistically run your organization's training effort and lead that with the tactical knowledge. That's the model that the other services use, and that's we think that's the model that best support. But it is, to your point exactly, that we're trying to do that.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and close it up, right? We've gone pretty far on this. Great discussions. And so everybody understands that there's battle rhythm events every month that cover these things, right? The 110XO just told me, where you at? You said when?
I'm Williams. Hey, I'm Billy Lewis. I'm work for Colonel Johnson down there at Fort Novacell. I'm the operations officer. So every month, I've invited all the CWABs. I've got the regiment in there. Brian Talent was attending them pretty regularly. I have across Europe, Hawaii, a monthly IPR. The IPRs are scheduled. It goes through what we're doing now. So right now, just to let you know, the IPR that we're going to talk on is POIs and resourcing. So we're in phase 2 of implementing ATIC. UTE is not a 1/10 initiative. That's a DES initiative, so I can't really comment on that, but I can comment on ATIC. If you want to be a part of those MS teams meetings, it's the more the merrier. We have about 30 to 40 people that come in the conference room, and then we usually have about 100 online across Europe, PACOM. We see everybody. Sometimes Korea dials in, sometimes they don't. So I just welcome you to that. If you want, if you can write this down, it's William.J.Lewis188, because that's how many there are in the Army. William.J.Lewis188. I'll be over here after this if you want to come talk to me. Thank you.
All right, like I said, great discussions. A lot of new stuff coming out in the Army. A lot of things that we've got to do jointly. And so to wrap this up, everything that we just talked about, imagine doing it with FVL, future attack aircraft or whatever. Let's talk about doing it in the Pacific. And then to wrap up, is it still on? Did they cut me off? Okay, is this better? All right, so to wrap it all up, imagine doing this and doing all the DLQs. I think the guys in the room how many over here are DLQ qualified that are not currently sitting in the regiment? Are you DLQ qualified right now? So there's like 2 over here. How many are there? All of you. Okay, imagine the entire Army doing that for real next week, next month. Are we ready to do stuff like that? And how rapidly can we learn from you guys so that we can be as equipped to do the things that they do, because it'll be our full-time job if we're doing it in the Pacific Rim, okay? So we haven't even really scratched the surface here on how difficult the future actually is. Bottom line up front, we've got to work together, we've got to come to the meetings, we've got to read our doctrine, we've got to figure it out and get after it, okay? And we're not always going to agree, and we're going to scuff each other up, but we're going to be better for it, and we're going to save lives because we did that. Any questions of me? Pretty easy to find. There's only one Puls colonel in the Army on the internet. So if you have a question that you're not getting an answer from, send it to me. And until McCurry fires me, I'm going to be in DOTD. HOA? Thanks.